Dear academic left, actual violence in the name of preemptively fighting imaginary violence is still violence. Violently so. Next on Campus Roundup. Hi, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment this week focuses on conservative students under attack and addresses the dramatic increase in threats of violence directed at students whose worldview fails to conform to the prevailing progressive ethos on campus. To discuss her own eye-opening struggle with these issues at Cornell University, we welcome Neetu Chandak, a communications major and a contributing journalist at the College Fix. Neetu, you recently wrote an article for The Fix entitled Intolerance at Cornell that documents the bullying and threats you faced after appearing on Fox News to discuss a new anti-Trump course being offered at the university. Give us the background for that interview.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. And the entire point of writing that article was to show the struggles conservative students around the country faced. I appeared on Fox News back in May to discuss a course called America Confronts the World. It was comparing President Obama's first 8 years and President Trump's first 100 days. And I just found the course to be extremely biased, and it wasn't meant to be critical against the professor's character. It was more about just the unfair comparison between both people. And after that interview, I received a lot of backlash simply for being critical of the course.
Backlash is one thing, but what you actually received is threats and intimidation. What's interesting to me about this is that you were not calling into question, as you said, the right of the teacher to teach that class. You weren't demeaning the character of the teacher. You were simply raising legitimate questions about the potential balance. And for that, the progressive forces on and off campus attacked you personally, which I find very ironic. You were attempting to use your free speech to criticize the possible turn a course would take. And for that, your character was maligned. Is that how it happened on campus?
Yes, it did. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people who said the comments about me, they didn't personally know me. They've never interacted with me. And it just shows the intolerance that a lot of universities are breeding. And that was the other point I wanted to make. Universities should be upholding liberal values of free expression and tolerance rather than illiberal values of coercion and conformity.
It is a great point you raise, Neetu, that progressivism is not an outgrowth of liberalism. It is in many respects anti-liberal. And one of the things that you said in your article that I've been thinking for a long time, I've been on college campuses for 25 years now as a teacher, and as bad as the classrooms can be, there's a limit on what professors can get away with because, as your article shows, people are watching. But no one's paying attention to what's happening in the dormitories. And I think the dormitories are in some ways much, much worse ideologically than the classroom. You have your own experience with this. You were applying to be an RA for your floor at your dorm. Tell us a little bit about what happened to you as you were trying to work in your dorms.
Well, when I became an RA, we were put through training sessions where we had to use politically correct terms and a lot of sensitivity training. Also, as part of an RA, we had group meetings where we discussed social justice and political topics, a lot of times topics that were not related to the role of being an RA. And all of us had to contribute in order to get good RA evaluations. And my views tended to differ from the rest of the group. And it was often a little intimidating because it felt like I was one against so many people. And at one point, my boss had set me aside and he told me what terms I could and couldn't say outside the role of being an RA, which is pure censorship. And that is not right when college is supposed to be a place where we are exposed to many ideas and we learn how to tolerate each person and their individual differences.
That's really interesting. So in order to be an RA, you were told what you could and couldn't say, that if you had conservative views, you were not supposed to express them. And then you were told outside of the university, in your own private life by the same RA, one of the RAs, you were told, you know what, you also have to be careful of what you say in your private life. So you were being censored from within and being asked to censor yourself from without. Is that right?
Yes, and it was actually my boss that was telling me what I should and should not say. I don't like to I don't like to put blame on my coworkers because what happened was an example of the leadership, and that's really problematic. If we really want free societies and we want people to be able to express themselves, there has to be free speech. And that's the other issue we're actually seeing at Cornell. There's going to be a debate in April about whether Cornell should implement speech codes or not. And that would be a problem for minority voices on campus, because who decides the rhetoric that is hateful, and who gets to decide everything that happens with these speech codes? I imagine that it's very Orwellian in nature.
And, Neetu, as somebody who's been watching universities for a long time, and you've been living this, you check off so many boxes that the progressive administrator would love, right? You are in no means, you can't accuse you of white privilege, you can't accuse you of being a patriarchal agent here, right? That you are in some ways the face of diversity as universities claim to support it. And yet here you are, a strong woman with a voice of your own, using that voice to speak out. And because your opinions are not the mainstream university opinions, they're attacking you as if you were some boring old white guy with the wrong opinions about everything. Well, how do you survive that? And what do you think this says about the university's claims to be diverse places?
The way I survive it is you have to stand up for yourselves. And that's my message to young conservatives and anybody that's being bullied simply for their views. If you don't stand up, nobody's going to know what's exactly going on, because when I wrote this article, I received support from around the country and even from my liberal peers. And to me, that says a lot. So I would just ask young conservatives to stand up for themselves. Anybody that questions their humanity, I would ask them this question. I would ask them to say this: I am open-minded and I'm willing to listen to other viewpoints. Are you willing to do the same?
Neetu, if we had more voices like yours on college campuses that were willing to speak up and assert themselves, we'd have far less of this bullying and much better climate for everybody. Neetu Chandak of Cornell University, thank you so much for your time today. To hear more from student reporters like Neetu, follow The College Fix on Twitter and Facebook. Time now for Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix Associate Editor Greg Piper for a conversation about the rise of violence and violent threats against conservative students on American campuses. Greg, why aren't universities scrambling to dissociate themselves from this anti-conservative bullying, as they would be if such threats were directed, say, at students of color or alternative sexualities?
I think there's a feeling among a lot of administrators that these students who are being bullied for their political views kind of have had it easy in life. They come into the college as part of a dominant culture, a dominant race, a dominant sexuality oftentimes, and that this is kind of their time to actually feel what it's like to be a person of color, someone who is conventionally marginalized. And they can kind of handle it. They aren't dealing with what you might call psychological issues that come with having grown up as a minority in a community, and their families are probably able to pay for more of their education. They have not had the traditional hardships that are assumed of a lot of people who would be considered marginalized.
Yeah, and this is really, when you boil it down, not critical thinking. This is not education by example. This is kind of shame therapy. It's scapegoating. And the interesting thing about that is that you've created a campus culture where certain kids not only have absolute free speech rights, but those free speech rights extend to the ability to silence and, in some cases, even censor other kids. And if you are on the wrong side of that, not only do you not have free speech, but your very presence now becomes an issue in classrooms. And so with that in mind, the College Fix has written some really great articles documenting the sort of how incrementally worse this is getting on college campuses. Share with us some of the examples of bullying against conservative students or traditional students that seems to have been in the news lately, and how they're moving down the road quite quickly now.
One of the things that we often see is when conservative students write opinion articles in their own student paper, they face a lot, not just criticisms for their argument, but attempts to shut them down and to shame the paper into not publishing these kind of articles, or to creating special sections that are reserved for marginalized people, perhaps with really no editing, simply like an online forum. but actually in the newspaper, above the fold, things that people get to argue without really anyone contradicting them. This happened to one of our writers, whose name is Brian Staskevich. He's at Wesleyan University. He wrote a pretty mild critical article about tactics in the Black Lives Matter movement. And the result from campus activists was to try to defund the newspaper. The student government got in on this. They suggested changing the funding formula. Things that are really going to make it hard for a newspaper to go on with this. It's a message to be careful what you publish, even if it looks okay to you, even if it doesn't really look like it's something that's going to rile feathers, because you don't know what's going to happen when you publish even what might be called middle of the road or reasonable comments about this. We've seen this from other students who write op-eds. Jonathan Zhao at Duke University, who's the opinion editor, he wrote a column that had some hard words for the Black community, and saying that a lot of the problems here are traceable to practices and cultural attitudes in this community, stuff that you really would want to respond to and to make a reasoned argument against it. But again, the target there was to get him actually kicked out of his role as opinion editor, to shame him and to say that he is actively harming students on campus simply by making a polemical view. Stuff that happens all the time from people who are arguing on the other side, who are saying that we need safe spaces and we need to be protected, and that these words harm us. But they're not going to extend the same grace to people who have a different view.
And that's a remarkable point that bears repeating to the folks watching at home. This is not just the undermining of the classroom, right? The argument that the classroom is such a hermetically sealed environment that this doesn't spill out into the real world. This now threatens the very fundamental principles of journalism. If certain people have to be punished for expressing views, it undermines much more than just what goes on in a teaching classroom. And Greg, as we wind down, give us, I know there's a great example from the University of Chicago, which historically has been one of the freer and one of the more committed to free speech universities out there. Talk a little bit about the controversy brewing at the University of Chicago right now.
So a professor in the business school at the University of Chicago invited Steve Bannon, President Trump's former chief strategist, former head of Breitbart, to come to a debate on campus about globalization and immigration, and to talk about his view, which is shared by many people in America and has a lot of adherents around the world, too. This is not simply an American issue. When this got out, student activists started to organize against it. They protested in front of the business school. Faculty signed an open letter to the administration saying that this would actually threaten the lives of the Black communities around the University of Chicago. Student government leaders said that it could create another Charlottesville, that people's lives were actually in danger if he came to campus. That suddenly white nationalists would come and someone, the implication being, would actually drive into a crowd of people, let's say protesters who are outside protesting this, and kill somebody. This is kind of really over the top. This guy is known for economic nationalism, for a view that you might say is the base view of America first. And he's controversial, he's polemical, but I don't really associate violence trailing him in this way. And I think students and faculty, even at a place like the University of Chicago, just kind of let their paranoia get away with them. This is going to be a debate in a venue with a moderator and someone arguing against him. It's the very definition of a public affairs program. And so far, the administrators have stood up and said anyone can invite anyone they want to speak on campus. But you have to wonder, is even the University of Chicago going to back down eventually, or to make concessions, or to treat these students differently simply because they say that words are violence?
It really does seem like on the modern campus, the smaller the potential infraction, the larger the hyperbole about how bad it's going to get. Greg Piper, associate editor at the College Fix, thanks for your time today. And be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix editors by joining us on our social media platforms. The College Fix has been at the forefront in documenting how the rhetoric of violence emanating from the academic left is rapidly morphing into actual violence against students and faculty who do not adopt progressive precepts. All of which gives rise to a paradoxical and altogether intended set of consequences. Here's how it works. Opportunistic faculty, hallucinating revolution in the air, and preying upon the useful idiocy of zealous students, label all speech that challenges progressive assumptions a form of violence. Dutiful campus apparatchiks then rushed to crack down on offensive conservative speech in order to protect liberal sensibilities from the imagined verbal violence. And finally, campus radicals then sweep in, justifying both violent threats and actual violence against conservative speakers to shut them down and guarantee that others are not invited to campus. And the wheels of the bus go round and round as more and more students and faculty are thrown beneath them. So, what's the fix? We've seen time and again that universities only restrain destructive leftist overexuberance when pressured to do so from outside, usually the result of lawsuits filed by conservative students or professors whose rights have been violated. And since federal entities and state legislatures offer only tepid platitudes instead of authentic defenses of First Amendment protections at public universities, the only serious hope for reform must lie with liberal professors themselves. The reality is that many of the relatively small number of conservative professors on campus keep their mouths shut and their profiles low, so that there are fewer and fewer genuine conservative voices to silence. This means that more and more moderate and traditionally liberal faculty are finding themselves in the crosshairs of progressive anger and violence. This was certainly true in the case of Professor Weinstein at Evergreen State University, who dared to remain in his classroom when leftist radicals ordered him to leave campus and abandon his teaching duties in the name of minority safe spaces. A redoubtable liberal, Weinstein stood his ground and called out the violent anarchy of student and faculty groups on campus. Predictably, the administration threw him under the aforementioned progressive bus, siding with the student rabble. One lawsuit and $3.85 million compensatory dollars later, Professor Weinstein was vindicated. If what remains of the sober left at American universities were simply to wake up and rally again to the formerly liberal values of free speech, debate, and association, then sanity could be restored for all on campuses. As more liberal faculty, not just conservative bogeys, fall prey to violent progressive activism, the possibility for real campus change may indeed become a reality again. And that's the final fix. I'm Dr. Duke. For more videos and original articles, visit thecollegefix.com. And don't forget to like The College Fix on Facebook and follow on Twitter to receive your daily dose of right-minded news and commentary from across the nation.